meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. All right. Well, Jessica, welcome. Welcome to the Forgotten Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you here today. I've been looking through your social media. I told you this right before we started recording, and I am so excited to talk with you and for our listeners to get to know you as well. Author Simon Sinek, he reminds us, start with why. So I want to just do that. Let's just start right there. What is your why? Why are you a foster parent?
I think it's a simple answer and then I guess a not so simple answer. I think the simple answer is just because I kind of felt that tug in my heart and just the desire to do something that made a difference, as cliche as it sounds, but just felt like it was a way to impact the community in just kind of a deeper way than any other way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Any other mode of being involved kind of in your local community. Yeah. And the not so simple answer, I guess, is just because as a believer, it was just a call. I felt like it was a call from God, and it was something that my husband and I kind of wanted to pursue for our family, which can be complicated, but is what we felt like he wanted us to do.
Yeah. And was this something that you did you feel that tug as an adult, or was there any of that prior to, getting married and stuff?
When I was younger, I honestly don't think I even knew what foster care was. I was aware of adoption for sure. But I felt like it was actually kind of a taboo thing sometimes, where sometimes adoption was talked about like, he's adopted, we're not sure if he knows. Where, we didn't have like that openness and conversation about, talking about birth families and things like that. And so I kind of didn't understand like God's heart behind it. But then as an adult, for sure, my eyes were opened, and I still was more just on the adoption kind of pathway and mindset of thinking, maybe one day I'll adopt from Africa or China, or, just very international, not understanding that there could be much of a domestic need.
Totally.
So it was definitely a growth process.
Yeah. What do you feel like first kind of made you aware of kids in your own community?
Yeah. So my husband and I, we no longer live there, but we did live in Athens, Georgia. We've since moved to the metro Atlanta area, but we went to a conference at our church, and it wasn't hosted by our church. It was hosted by a local ministry just at our church. Yeah. And this ministry is a ministry that serves adoptive and foster families. So they provide adoption assistance grants, and then they also come around adoptive and foster families with educational resources, and then they provide something called care teams to just kind of lighten the load for foster families. And so we went to the conference actually probably a couple of years into our marriage. I think we were married 2-3 years at that point. And we honestly just went to learn, because at that point we had talked about adoption, and we also were trying to get pregnant, but weren't getting pregnant. And so we were kind of in this place where we were like, we want to grow our family. We feel like we're supposed to be doing something, but we're not sure what it is. And so some friends of ours who also had some fertility issues had gone to the conference and felt like they were supposed to adopt. But when we left, we felt like we were supposed to foster. Wow. And that was when everything kind of was put in our face. We heard all the statistics and the numbers and just were in shock at all of the kids that were vulnerable children in our area, and just had no idea before then that the need was so great.
That is awesome.
That kind of started the ball rolling.
That is so beautiful. Let's give a shout out to that ministry who is...
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, Chosen for Life Ministries.
Oh,
they're awesome.
So awesome. Isn't that encouraging? I would think I mean, just all of us you're in ministry as well, right? We're in work and we're just faithfully trying to be faithfully walking, obediently, stumbling forward sometimes. And you have these ideas and you put on a conference or you put out a podcast or whatever. And you're like, okay, Lord, here it is. And he does the work. Like, I just think that's so encouraging. So I hope this is an encouragement to our friends at Chosen for Life also. Is that what that's awesome. What it's called? Chosen for Life.
Yes,
it's
so
wonderful.
Great.
It's wonderful. Okay. So you did then enter foster care prior to having any biological children. That is a unique dynamic. And I would love to explore this because I think that, I mean, I have a lot of questions surrounding this. So like what kind of response, let's start here maybe, what kind of response did you get from people around you?
So initially, there was a lot of people who kind of assumed that we were doing it just because we were having fertility issues. But it was more like we learned about the need and we had talked about adoption anyway. So it had just kind of pivoted. And then we felt like, why wait when we don't really have this guarantee? I mean, there was, of course, this hope and faith and belief that we would eventually have biological children, and we do now. But it was kind of like, we have empty rooms and the Lord's put the desire there. So why would we just kind of keep waiting until the right time?
Right.
And so we tried to explain. So we would just explain to people like, no, this isn't just because we're like just wanting a baby or anything like that. And then we didn't even have babies in our home anyway. So, and we, overall, people, for the most part, I think because there was a culture of adoption and foster care that had already begun in our church home at that time, I think that it really helped because a lot of people were really supportive. I mean, I think they were scared for us and we were scared too.
Sure.
Like they were just like, okay. But a lot of people honestly were really supportive and wanted to help us and just kind of come around us because we needed it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned you did not start with babies.
No. And we still haven't had any babies through foster care. We've only had our biological kids. But so we had said, I was an elementary school teacher. So I taught elementary school for about 6 years. And at the time that we were fostering, I had just finished teaching and had stepped into another role at our church, actually. But so I kind of thought, I know kids, like, I got this. I mean, if I can manage like almost 30 kids or, whatever, what's like 2, 3 in my house, clearly wrong.
Right. Those are the same. I've said really the same, wrong. Similar things.
Just so naive and very wrong and so unfamiliar with trauma and all the things and still learning so much about trauma and just having a hard time with that. But, so we had said that we wanted older kids because, we just thought, well, like, we've never had a baby. What would we do with a baby? But, I think we said up to like age 7 or 8, we said birth to like 7 or 8. Cause we were like, that's not like too big.
Right.
And it ended up, what happened was my husband and I got approved in May of, I think 2017, I want to say. And I think we had like started the whole process the previous year, going through all of the training and everything, or maybe it was 2018, but it doesn't matter. So we got approved and a couple weeks later we got a call and we had said we would take at most 2 kids and we get a call for 3 kids. You know where this is going. So I was just like, I think we're supposed to say yes. Like, it's just one more. It's just one more. What's one more? And my husband was just like, oh. And we actually had the luxury of being able to take a little time because they just really didn't have a place for them. And so they said, well, if you my husband was going out of town for like a trip for work. And I was like, I'm not going to say yes and take these kids by myself. So we said, let us think and pray about it. And, if we say yes, it'll be, at the end of the week when my husband gets back. And so we ended up saying yes. And so we had 3 kids. Now I'm forgetting. I think they were 6, 8, and 10.
Wow.
And it was 2 girls and a boy. So
way to start.
Yeah, it was something else. And it was they were only with us for a couple months, but it felt like a couple of years.
I'm sure that was a big start.
Oh man, we were super stretched.
Oh, I am sure. And do you feel like that? I think for parents, I mean, you've experienced this now as having biological kids. We have a lot of insecurities having kids,
sure.
right? And but I think when you foster, I would guess, before ever experiencing being a parent, were those, I mean, did you have so many insecurities or questions or wondering if this is normal or not normal?
I think because I had taught, there were some things where I was like, oh, that's just an 8-year-old. And there were others where I was like, that is not normal. Like, that's, because I had so much experience with kids and stuff where I was like, no, that's not like, that's not run of the mill kid stuff.
Yes.
We're dealing with something a little different here.
Yeah.
But yeah, there definitely still were insecurities because it was like, how do we know how to address these challenges? And what do we, it was intense.
Oh, I can imagine. I even think when we had 2 biological daughters and then we adopted our son, and him coming home, he was a 10-month-old, but I remember feeling like I was babysitting, and all of a sudden there's this like child that you've loved for many months, you know, we got his referral when he was 5 days old, but then he comes home and he's a kid, and it's the things he would do I hadn't experienced before, and I would often ask, is this an adoption thing, or is this a boy thing, or is this just a him thing, you know? So it's, I think I just want all of our listeners to realize that there are so many insecurities we all deal with. What do you do with those insecurities?
I think one of the biggest things for me is reaching out to other adoptive and foster moms and just kind of being really real with them and saying like, hey, this is what we're dealing with. And then also talking to friends who have kids who are not adopted or who are not through the foster care system. Like, and then sometimes, like, for instance, we have a teenage girl now, and she's our adopted daughter now, but it was through foster care. And she, as we like have gotten to know different friends who are parents of teenagers, because we're like in our early 30s, like
it's not a normal time to be parents.
Our peers are not parents of teenagers. So we have some friends who are like a couple stages ahead who have teenagers, and we're like, because they'll talk about stuff and it's like the same thing, and it's like with their biological kids, and we'll be like, okay, yes, this is just a teenager thing, like, but we like are so quick to be like, oh my gosh, like trauma, you know, totally. And it's like, nope, like we're probably going to deal with this like 15, 16 years down the road with our biological kids too, because that's teenagers, you know.
Teenagers are their own thing.
So, yeah. So I think reaching out to friends and then just praying a lot and honestly just like hoping that they don't remember a lot of things that I say sometimes.
Totally. Grace.
So, yeah.
Yes, I love that. Well, we also know that loss is a very real part of foster care. It's really a real part of life, isn't it?
Of course.
And you've navigated a lot of loss recently in the past year or so. What have you learned, or what are you learning through this time?
Oh, man, that's a big one.
I just kind of jumped in the deep end, didn't I?
You really went for it. I'm like, okay, I have a tissue. Okay. Woo. Golly. I think the thing that I'm like working through, whatever, in this moment is just understanding that like it truly is okay to not be okay all the time. And I think that I've had to learn that lesson over and over, kind of in layers, within the last even 5-6 years or so, just with different circumstances, because I kind of pride myself on being a pretty capable person and, you know, just very wanting to get things done and really valuing efficiency and productivity. And at the same time, I am definitely a people person. So like I love relationships, but I can just, you know, I can get in that place where I'm really squirrely and antsy because I'm not dealing with something or I haven't had the space to process something. And so I get into this like controlling mode and it's not good. So I think the thing that I'm learning is that it's okay to not be okay, in that I can just be human. And I know that kind of sounds cliche, but like truly, it's okay to have a range of emotions
Right.
and different things that I'm working through. And it's okay to hold joy and sorrow and angst and gratitude and like all of those things that seem to be opposing. Like, it's okay to be working through them all in the matter of like 2 hours, like,
Right.
like, and I think for me, I find comfort in the Psalms so much because like, otherwise I would just feel so crazy. Like I would think I was losing my mind if we didn't have the Psalms to see the way that David and the other psalmists did the same thing, where they were just like, I love you, Lord. I hate my life. Like,
Totally.
because I feel like that's where I've been. Like, that's where I'm sitting, where I'm like, Lord, you're so good, that I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and just crying. And, so yeah, I think just, it's okay not to be okay, and reaching out and telling people and asking for prayer, and not feeling like I have to kind of keep a brave face on all the time.
Right.
Which is hard, is hard for me to do. So,
Hey, Forgotten Podcast family. In Malachi 3:10, the Lord says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. Don't you love that imagery? We believe in a God who lavishes good gifts on us. He loves to increase our faith as we give generously. I want to invite you to test God in this way. Will you give generously to TFI? Will you join our 310 partners? This team is made up of listeners like you giving to support the foster care community. We would love to have you on the team. You can learn more and give at theforgotteninitiative.org/team310. That's theforgotteninitiative.org/team310. Now back to the show. I think it's hard for all of us. Like, I remember a day when I was in church and went through a really difficult season several months ago, and I was very low, and all I wanted to do was leave, right? Just go hide. Like, I didn't feel like, but God like gave me the grace to share with some really good friends what I was going through. And of course I cried, and it was exhausting, but they encouraged me so much. And it just reminded me, like what you're saying, we have to share, and we're not going to want to. Like, I think we need to recognize, like, we're not going to want to. It's going to be hard. Satan wants to keep us in the dark, make us feel isolated. And so I just affirm that. And I appreciate you saying that I agree. It's okay to not be okay. And let's talk. Let's be real with one another. We need each other.
Right. And I am such a verbal processor anyways. And so I need to like get it out in some way. And so to feel like I can't like express it, it's just hard for me. So I'll try to like text a few key people, or I'll talk to my husband. And before we moved, actually, like, we were in counseling. And so picking that back up, just like any way to just get it out. Totally. So,
Do you like to journal?
I do. Yeah, I do. It's hard right now with a newborn.
Understandably.
Extended journaling time. But I try to get it in when I can. Yes.
I find that helps me too when I can't speak it out, writing it out. No. What role, we talked kind of somewhat about insecurity. Fear is also kind of a very real emotion that seems to present itself a lot in foster care. How do we guard our hearts from living in fear in this very unknown foster care journey?
Well, I will just be really honest and say that fear has been a huge part of the foster care journey for me. And even in the midst of like where we're at now, we're just kind of like, we've closed our home to fostering for now, and are just taking some time to like process, like you said, this last season of loss and just so much change and transition in our family. And, you know, my husband's like, yeah, we're going to open up again sometime. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, so, and it's honestly fear that I'm like, I don't want to do that right now, you know? So, but I think just, understanding the reward that we see in the relationships built, in the seeds planted, in the generation, literally like generations that are changed because of the impact that we can have through that when we allow the Lord to use us in this way, that is so uncomfortable and so sanctifying. That's where I'm like, okay, no, I can't let fear be the boss of me. And, I think, and honestly, just from sheer just wanting to be obedient, so that's kind of how I deal with that.
Yeah, it is
doing it scared.
Yes, and that's what I've heard about courage. Just doing it afraid. It's not. You don't need courage if it's not scary, right? Then you just do it.
If it's easy,
right? And there's really no adventure without a little fear, I think, because people who go skydiving. They have some fear, right? It wouldn't be an adventure if they're just like, I'm going to step out onto the ground, right? So sometimes I try to remind myself of those things, like the fear and all of that is part of the journey. But like you said, we don't want it to be the boss. It reminds me, my husband and I went through a failed adoption several years ago. And got all the way to the point of going to Uganda. We're with our little girl, went to court, had her for 10 days. We loved her. Awful. And went home expecting to go back to get her and found out the judge said no. And it was extremely painful. And it impacted all of us. It impacted our kids. We were packed and ready to go back. It was just devastating. And so we took some time off, kind of like you guys have been doing. But we questioned, like, Lord, are we supposed to adopt again? Was that a no to adoption, or was that just a no to this child? Did you have a different plan? And ultimately, that's what we came to as well, is if we say no, it's because we're afraid of being hurt again. We don't want to be hurt. And but we can't let fear rule. And so we talked to our kids, and they unanimously said, we got to do this again. And since that time, God has given us a young son named Friday. And he's going to be 10 in just a couple days. And we would have missed out on him had we let fear rule. And that doesn't always mean that the answer is yes, right?
Yeah.
But the answer is, if God, there's no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. So I resonate with what you're saying. We'll shift gears a little bit. How important do you feel like it is to have a caring community of people around you as you foster?
Honestly, I think that's like top three. Obviously, like a unified front if you're married, and obviously being on the same page that you're saying yes to this, a community, and then just a willingness to be teachable. I think, but that's another reason. Like that's a big part of why we're also taking a break, is because we don't necessarily have community in our new town yet. And we moved to the town where my parents live, and they're just on the other side, so they're about 30 minutes away, but they can't be our be all end all. So it would be really unwise of us for many reasons to jump in just because we're like, oh, but we should keep going.
Totally.
I would say that's a huge part, just because for us, the way that we've been cared for from care teams through the years of fostering was just weekly meals. They would do prayer, like on court dates and stuff. And we would send just prayer updates each week and stuff. And then, babysitting, just all kinds of different things. We got like furniture and, just all kinds of ways that they just came around and let us know that we weren't alone. So yeah, I would say that's huge.
That's so encouraging. I hope that, excuse me, I hope that our listeners recognize that, because not everyone is going to be a foster parent, right? But let us never undervalue the support role. It is so critical. We need everybody just being obedient to whatever God is calling them to do, whether it's through foster care, adoption, other sorts of ministry. Like, let's all be just simply obedient and walk faithfully. What would you say, or maybe I guess I will say it this way, would you say, Jessica, that you have experienced more of Jesus because you have been a foster parent?
Oh, yeah. For sure. I mean, if only for sheer need for him.
Totally.
I think just I've been humbled so many times where, I mean, it's just about every day where, there's just ways that I think things should go and they don't go that way. I just kind of have in my mind just the thoughts about and expectations about situations or the way that I think things should be. And that's just not the reality. And so, that's just life, but especially so in foster care where there's so many unknowns and you really don't have control over so many things. And obviously I know that we don't truly have control over a lot, but there is a difference when you've got your biological versus your foster children through foster care because of all of the different nuances with courts and the county and everything and all of the different things that they require or ask of you and people in your home and kind of just watching you. I mean, that's just a whole nother level.
It is.
And so that has required me to just trust the Lord and not, my own strengths or my own abilities or anything.
Wow. Has he been faithful?
Yes, for sure. And that's the thing, even though it's turned out completely different than I would have thought, he's been faithful through it all. And so that's what's helped me to see okay, this is worthwhile because he's showing me more of himself,
Yeah. I think that's something that we value here at TFI, and that's part of our vision is we want to see people. It's not part of our vision. It is our vision. We want to see people everywhere supporting the foster care community and experiencing Jesus together. And we just firmly believe that not only does the church have something to offer the foster care community or those who don't know Jesus, the foster care community has a lot to offer the church because when we work together, we all experience more of Jesus. I think it's difficult to experience him in new ways when we do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
We got to get uncomfortable.
And I think that's my temptation because I just really like my comfort. I mean, that's one of my idols for sure. That's where that controlling kind of nature comes in where I'm like, you do this, you do that because I need it to be this way.
Right.
And just being stripped of that is painful and hard, but it's so good. And it helps me to see no, there's a better way. And it's not a better way there's a better way of doing this. It's a better way of living by trusting and resting in him instead of feeling like I have to manipulate things.
Yes. Yes. And better is often not easier, is it?
Exactly.
We wish that were the case.
Because I'm like, well, I just feel, is there any way that we could just have some smooth sailing? Is that so much to ask? I mean, I can't even tell you the amount of times that I've asked the Lord that in the last few months of is there going to be a season where things don't feel hard all the time? Ever again? Ever? And I'm not sure what he said to me about that yet.
Yes. I will say from my experience, and he does talk in the Bible about always providing a way out. And we went through, like I told you, a really rough season, challenging. And I feel like God has given a season of reprieve. That's what I feel like I'm in right now. And I want to gear up for, I want to be faithful and walk in obedience for this season so that when it gets hard again, because it will at for different reasons, right? That we're ready. But I do pray and I expect you will enter a season of reprieve.
Yeah. And honestly, I think I know that, in my spirit, where you're like, well, duh. I mean, there's obviously the Lord, it shows us so much in the word about seasons. But I think in my mind,
totally.
I mean, that's where the battle is, where it's easy to get into that discouragement and despair and think it's just never going to, everything's just going to be awful all the time.
Totally.
And even in this season, there's so much that I can be grateful for and it's not all awful all the time. It just feels,
I hear you. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. It's hard. As we kind of close out here, Jessica and I have enjoyed talking with you. But as we close out here, what encouragement do you have for other foster parents who are in a difficult season, just like you are experiencing, right? Give some encouragement, would you?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that God is always faithful. And I think that's what's carried me through lots of different seasons outside of fostering.
Sure.
Is just remembering that he hasn't left me, and I am not ever alone. And I can feel really alone and think to myself, no one understands. And I think there's a really big temptation, and I've definitely succumbed to it within fostering, to think, no one understands, because our situations are often really unique. And I think I've definitely believed that lie before. Well, I know I've definitely believed that lie before, where I've thought, well, no one understands because no one has been through this. And the truth is, none of my friends do understand this. I mean, that really is true.
Sure.
Literally none of my friends have walked through this set of circumstances, but the same could be said about something in their life that I don't know about, or that I haven't experienced. So I think, just put so much value on thinking that we need to be understood in every way by people around us. And that's just not really reasonable or, attainable. It doesn't, that just doesn't make sense. So I think that the biggest thing is that we can remember that people around us have walked through hard times too. And it may look different than what we're walking through, but the word says that he comforts us so that we can comfort others. And so I think it's good to remember that we don't need to shut ourselves out from receiving that comfort from others just because they don't get it, because it's just really encouraging words and sweet and kind gestures have come from people in my life that know me and love me, but aren't foster parents. But they responded to the Holy Spirit and reached out or called or, sent something in the mail or something like that. So I think looking at all of those different ways that God shows himself faithful can help us to be confident and remember that he truly is for us. So I think that's honestly like what can carry you through on those hard days when you're just like, I want to give up and I never want to do this again, So.
And that made me think, I remember when one of my friends, her mother passed away, was killed in a car accident, and it was very traumatic and very, sudden, and she was way too young. And I just remember talking to my friend and going, I wish I could understand like what you're like, trying to empathize, but knowing I hadn't had that experience. And she said, pain is pain. Like you've experienced pain too. Like, and I think that that was for her to even encourage me when she was the one really suffering. But I think the reality is our circumstances are different, but we share the same emotions. We've all felt hopeless. We've all felt mad and angry or disillusioned or misunderstood, so I think those are the things that we share in common, are the feelings. And so we can help each other out, whether or not we've gone through the exact same thing, because none of us will, right? None of our circumstances will ever be the exact same. But we do share the same emotions.
Yeah. And I think that there is value in people who have gone through something similar, because there is like another level of understanding.
Definitely.
But, we can't count on that as the be all end all of, our comfort.
Right. He is our comfort. Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.